son. Y'all ever heard that?
Yeah, so the word prodigal is not in the text. That's added later.
Yeah.
And so really, it's a story of two prodigal sons.
Yeah. Both are in need of repentance.
And you did that. You did that.
I hope so. I hope first time through, I hope that came through clear that he's talking to two people and he's the middle ground.
Yeah, and they're
Who
like
sent
this.
him. Yeah. Both are in need of repentance.
It's
in
amazing.
life.
Powerful brothers are like that.
Yeah, it's true.
Thank God.
Thank you.
We're live.
All right, good morning.
We're
Good morning.
live.
I'm James Johnson, one of your pastors.
And I'm Taylor McPherson, your worship leader here.
Oh, it's been a great morning. We've come through early service. I was on vacation, and Taylor preached the sermon for us this morning. Just incredible. We've got a great story to talk about
Yeah, we
today.
do. We do have a good story.
Don't forget to reach out to us. When you add comments, because this is going out on Facebook and YouTube, we don't always get to see every single comment.
Yeah.
If you want to make sure that we know what you want us to hear, send us an email. I'm at pastorjames@fumcgallatin.org,
Yep.
and you are
Mine's just Taylor McPherson at GFUMC Gal. Well,
probably
say that.
Taylor.
Dot McPherson. Ready?
Yeah.
Take two. Taylor, period, McPherson at
fumcgallatin.org. We'd love to hear from you and that you're enjoying this time.
Yeah.
So Taylor,
Yeah.
let's look at this and let's have some conversation about Luke 15.
Okay.
Get us started.
I've read it too much. No, well, funny story. So Luke 15 has been circulating the halls of the church for at least a week,
Yeah.
right? And it's so funny because I was, wondering, I was going between Romans 3 and Luke 15 and through a series of events of people mentioning how they were in Luke 15 and then Grace, pastor's daughter.
On Father's Day, you
Yeah.
think about a Father's Day text.
Yeah.
This is a great Father's Day text
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
And so, right before our time started, we know this story as the prodigal son.
Right.
Now, is that in the biblical text?
It's not. So
And where does that come from?
So the word squandered in wild living, okay? Wild living, and it's in verse 13, okay, if you're in the NIV. They're squandered as well in wild living. Wild living, you can translate that prodigally, which just means loosely, wildly, wickedly. Okay, that's the idea. And so it's just, over time, people have attached prodigal, that term, to this first son and called it, this is the parable of the prodigal son. If I had it my way, no one asks me. It's okay. I would call it the parable of the loving father.
Yeah, because that's where the emphasis is.
It's all about him.
Right.
Yeah.
So you might rename the story, and there's nothing. So it's sometimes hard to tell. Okay, what parts of the Bible are the biblical text,
Yeah.
and which parts are the study notes?
Yes.
The chapters and verse numbers. That's not
Right.
wasn't in the original
They
manuscripts.
didn't even use punctuation.
They did. So all that's been added later.
Yeah.
So the superscription, the prodigal son, that is not the text, but it's not a bad title. It's just not the only one that's there. You could think of it as the prodigal of two sons, because, and we're going to talk through that a little bit, but not only do you have the younger son who goes away, you're really left with a question about the older son.
That's right.
Does he come to embrace his brother and his father's grace? Now,
Yes.
let's also talk about it this way.
Okay.
It could also be the story of the prodigal father who lives wildly by God's grace, that is so extravagant with grace toward his younger son and to his older son, it is an example of the Heavenly Father's love and pursuit of all of us. And I really appreciate
Absolutely.
how today you wove in the explicit naming of prevenient grace, which is one of our Wesleyan understandings of grace.
Yeah.
Again, now, Wesleyan understanding of grace, it's based on the Bible. This is an interpretation, and I think a good one,
Yeah.
what do you call it when God does this for us before we are even believers?
That's right. Before you can put a name on it or understand.
How do you understand that? So we got a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah, it's great.
So you started the sermon by introducing us to 3 parables.
Yeah.
And so we had the word prodigal, which meant living wildly, but the word parable is different.
Yes.
What does this word parable mean?
It's very simple. It's more of a literary form. It's a story. So different though, now hear this, it's different than an allegory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, an allegory is where in a story, each thing that is mentioned in the story has an exact correlation to something else. The best allegory you could probably think of would be The Pilgrim's Progress, okay, by John Bunyan. There's this tons of pictures, images everywhere, and he is specifically an allegory trying to relate this character you see to a doctrine or this character to a reality of grace. That's not what a parable is. And the parable really is a story meant to help us understand maybe a more full woe concept or beauty of who God is, but in a story form. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the parables are not super tight.
Yeah.
So parables teaching, and it gives us room to kind of figure it out. And,
Yes.
And it's an artful way of telling a story so that you become a part of that story. So that it's very invitational, so that you might be in the story and start saying, oh, I see myself there,
Totally.
or I see myself doing this.
Yeah.
One of the dangers to a parable
Yes, tell it.
is that you can push the elements of the story
Yes.
beyond their meaning, even to contradict the purpose of the meaning. So
Yes.
you could push this story about parables, and you think about the pods that the younger son was
Right.
eating, and start building a diet, a wild diet of the Gentiles or something based on peas in a pod, or which has
Nothing to do with anything.
It's mentioned in the story, but if you focus on what the pigs were eating,
Yeah.
you've missed the point of the parable.
Absolutely.
All right, so
Absolutely.
there's a lot there.
That's good.
It's one of 3 parables, and so all of these are talking about things that are lost. All
Yeah.
right. So what were the first 2?
So lost sheep,
Mm-hmm.
and then the widow's lost coin or drachma, which is a day's wages. I like that. I like knowing that because that helps me understand. This isn't just like a penny. We're talking about I worked all day, and then where'd that money go? So those 2.
And then the parable of the lost son. Verse 11, Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. So there are certain expectations in a first century world about how property would be divided.
Yes.
And so before you really get into the story, what would be the expectation for property rights when the younger son asked for his share
Yeah.
of the estate?
I think a good way to think about it would be, so the older son, the firstborn, would receive twice as much as the following child and so on. So really the younger son, I think Jesus is using this, it's really beautiful to show his hastiness. It is quite a bit of property. The idea is that the father is very wealthy, but it certainly is less than the older brother. That's the idea. So the younger brother, who's probably going to get a third of what's here.
And
That's how they would divide it.
I appreciate that. So
Yeah.
I've heard it in thirds. Like
Okay.
so the older son will have 2/3. The
Yeah.
younger son would have a third.
Yes.
And that in this arrangement, depending on the size of your farm or the size of your property, it's not going to mean the end of the farm,
No.
but it's going to put a bind on things. Because when you're talking about scale,
Yep.
the more that you have, the better you are to be more productive.
Yeah.
And so there's a scale problem here. And think, again, this is a parable. It doesn't tell us how the younger son gets cashed out.
I know, liquidates this
liquidates the
or-
property.
yeah.
This is so. that's beyond the story.
Yeah.
And I think what's most important is that you hear, oh, this is happening. It's significant. And that you would have some sense of how the economy is working here.
Yeah.
But again, we can only take it so far or we're outside the story.
Yeah.
Verse 13, not long after that, the younger son gathered all that he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered wealth and wild living.
Wild women.
in all kinds of ways. In the sermon, again, you need to watch the sermon today that Taylor will talk about how wildly and extravagantly I love this image that you used about taking his hand in his pocket and just kind of throwing his money out.
Yeah,
you know?
it's crazy. Wow, it's a picture.
You also noted that to do this means he's not coming back.
Yeah, I think that's significant. I think it's good to see that at the beginning Jesus tells us that he gathered together all he had. And what I just said was, and I think Jesus kind of wanting to show us, is that he did not plan to come back. The idea was, I've got what I have, it's mine, I'm leaving, and I'm not leaving anything to come back for. So it's this idea of abandonment, of taking this inheritance and running, and I'm gone.
I think we would all have times in our life where we might be at a place to say, I'm going to do this, and there's no going back.
That's right.
And that's where this decision is.
Yeah, it is.
I think for me, making a decision after my parents had moved us to Dixon to go to college, which I was the first child to go to college on my mom's side of the family.
That's awesome.
And I had an aunt on my dad's side who had went. My dad was one of 8 children, and so
Wow.
there was an aunt that had gone to college, but most did not go.
Yeah.
And so, but on my mom's side, the closest side, to say to go to college, life will not be different. Oh, life will not be the same
Yeah.
once you've done that. All right.
Yeah.
Verse 14. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. I think sometimes it'd be easy to miss that this famine isn't just hitting the younger son,
Right.
but it's hitting
The
everybody.
whole country.
So father, the older brother, so it's ratcheting up the intensity of the story to say that when there was a famine, it affected everybody. When there was a recession, it affected everybody.
Yeah.
No matter who you were, when you were a citizen of the human race, all human beings were affected by COVID-19.
Right.
There was not a place
true.
that escaped
Huh.
that. For whatever reason,
That's a-
everybody
Great picture. Yeah.
of famine
Yeah.
that happened. So this person is in need.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 15, so he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. So first is he's Jewish, so to go feed pigs is employment of last resort.
Dude, it is the worst. I tried to think of what could we picture that in America to help us understand that. I don't know if we have anything quite that would bring such.
Not such a sense of universal repulsion.
Yeah,
because we do honor. There are really dirty jobs,
Yeah.
and we really honor
are
people
thankful.
who are thankful that
Yeah.
people do the dirty jobs. We're thankful for people who wake up and are going to work restaurants, so people
Yeah.
can go out to eat.
Yeah.
Who work in the fields, all kinds of places of employment. We're really thankful
Absolutely.
that people are going to work.
Yeah.
When you very quickly, I know
Yeah.
we're going to run out of time.
It's
but
all right. It's long. That's why I felt like I was just spitting this morning.
Will you describe a little bit more about the language between hired himself out?
Man.
What does that mean?
Okay. So when the text here says that he went and hired himself out, the literal word, if you just took everything off of context and everything, and you took this Greek word, it means glued. It means you glued yourself to. When you take that more figuratively and put that into this text and this idea, you get this picture of the prodigal son coming to a citizen of that country who is experiencing the famine. Nobody's hiring. Okay, nobody wants to hire anybody. I can't feed myself, much less you. He takes himself and he is trying to glue himself. He's forcibly pushing himself onto this citizen while the citizen is reluctantly, and so the idea is when you see the job he gives him, you see just how reluctant he is to take this son on. It's just this, please, please, gluing myself to you. Just, okay, fine, go feed my pigs idea.
It's reinforced in the next verse because it says he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So
Nothing.
not even his job is really hardly given to him.
No.
So this sense of desperation, of being hungry, and something that many of us don't ever really experience. We might fast, we might do, but we don't know what it is to feel hunger when there is not food, when you have absolutely nothing.
No resource.
And here he is, verse 17. When he came to his senses, and this is the turning point of this story, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. So he's coming to his senses, this moment of desperation. He has hit rock bottom, and now he realizes, though we are in famine, there is abundance back home. It doesn't have to work this way, but it does for so many of us that it takes hitting rock bottom to come to our senses, to wake up.
Yeah.
And when you talk about God and faith, the rock bottom, you think you're there, and then you realize you're not.
You're not there yet.
And you're not there yet.
Yeah.
And you just keep falling.
Yeah. I have experienced that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Before Jesus
Right.
found me and got me.
I was thinking about
Man.
this story that I might share in a children's message in the second service. Is that when I started pastoring, I was in school, and it meant every week driving to Memphis for 3-hour classes, and I'd have about 3 of them over 2 days, and sometimes class would end at 8:30 at night, and I need to drive back to Nashville.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
And I was hungry, I was tired, I was probably well challenged from a lecture, and I'd stopped in Jackson to eat, and I got turned around, headed the wrong way. And it's dark, and I'm tired, and I think I'd eaten, but it hadn't all taken effect yet.
Yeah.
And I'm driving, and I think, well, when I get to the next place, I'm going to turn around. Well, that next place didn't really happen. And I'm on this, divided highway, and I know that I'm not going the right way, but I just keep heading the wrong way.
Oh.
And eventually, I find one of those places you're really not supposed to turn around or something.
Totally.
And where I just had to make the decision, if I'm going to get home tonight, I'm going to have to stop and go the other direction.
Wow, so good.
And so we will never get back home as long as we're heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And so you have to come to a place, and my prayer is that you don't have to hit absolute rock bottom to make that decision, because you don't have to. I didn't have to wait till I ended up in Union City or Dyersburg before I turned around.
Right. Yeah.
And one of the great moments of hope and of grace is that for all of us, that we can turn our lives around with God. We can turn facing God, and every moment you driving in the right direction is a direction you're getting closer to home.
Amen. There's a word picture for this. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Proverbs 4, it says, the path of the righteous is like the rising of the dawn,
Mhm.
growing fuller and fuller to full day. You get on it, and there's a little bit of sunlight. The more you get on it, the more it rises, It's just the fullness of God.
I think we probably should try to summarize
Let's do
and
it.
move through this story. But there's so much here.
It's so good.
much. So the prodigal son comes to himself. He decides to go back home.
Yeah.
And then the story has this image of the father. And I want to tell you, if I was not in a relationship with my children, I'd feel as lost as my children were lost. And here's this image of the son coming over the horizon, and then the Jewish father, who it is disrespectful for a man to run in the first, but because he is so overcome, he has been looking for that image of his son day in, day out, day in and day out, day and night. And when he saw him, the father ran to the son. And I loved how you said that he never really gets a chance to say all that he wanted to say.
He just smothers him. So good.
I think it's Rembrandt's prodigal son picture.
Yes.
Has the image.
Just the falling from the father.
And could you hold this for me?
Yeah, totally.
So you got to look up Rembrandt's prodigal son, where the father has a firm, muscular hand on his shoulder as the younger son is kneeling before him as he's being welcomed in. But then like a very gentle other hand is supporting his back, and just so there's this both welcome but also place setting that you come back, and the father has called for the robe, and the robe is being placed around the prodigal son who is missing a shoe. So one of his feet is completely missing, and this father is hovering over the son, and puts the family ring, the signet, for the inheritance that is left. The father is renaming and re-identifying the son who rejected all of this. What the book, you got to see it online, and as these masters art age, they get darker and darker. What you want to be able to see a version of this is to see the people who are in the shadows. As they are looking on to the story, because the Pharisees and the lawgivers are looking on to this story. And then you have the tax collectors and the sinners, and they're in the shadows looking on to this story of this embrace. And then often that story ends with that, but there's the other story too of the older brother who he doesn't want to, he gets invited to the party, doesn't want to come.
He refuses.
You said, I'm the good son.
I've done what you said.
And the father says to the older son, when have you not had a party? When have I not been willing to throw you a party? When have you not had everything that you see him for is already yours? The other part of this is that both sons, that they didn't have to wait for their father to die to live into the kingdom that he had.
That's good.
As we begin to try to wrap this story up, we want you to know that you have not gone too far. Come to your senses, and you don't have to wait for certain things to happen in your life before you start making the right choice to follow Jesus.
True.
That he is here for you right now. He is ready to embrace you. Now, life with the Father is going to be different than it was in the wilderness. So you know that there's going to be some moments of adjustment in a part of the story that's not written. And again, the parable is the younger son will have to adjust to life back at home. And then for the older brothers who see this happening, it's the Father's mercy. It is the Father's grace. It always belonged to the Father. And even after the father dies and he received it, it still was, they didn't earn that. That's something the Father passed on.
Still gave on.
What are ways that you can embrace the wild ones in your story, in your life, in your family, and be grace-giving? And the human kind of condition wants us to say, you got to earn it. You got to deserve it. And the reality is we don't deserve any of this. We don't deserve to be here. We don't deserve you to join us for this. It's not for us. It's not for our egos or glory. It is for God. And there's grace to be had with the Father.
Amen.
Final thoughts?
That was it.
There's grace to be had with the Father. We love you. We want to know more about your story. Send us emails. Let us know that you were here today. And we can't wait to see you next week. Take care.